Melissa Moore. Melissa Moore went by the nickname of Lisa, and she was just 22 years old, a senior at the University of Tulsa, who grew up in Muskogee, Oklahoma. She was described as a sweet girl from a good family. She was last seen leaving a sorority event on March 26, 1984, and was supposed to be going straight home to her apartment nearby when she simply vanished into thin air. At first, her family wasn't terribly worried when they didn't hear from her. They figured she was just busy with friends, so a few days would be missed before she was reported missing on March 30th, although it would turn out her vehicle had been impounded on the 28th after being found abandoned 3 miles from Lisa's home. Neighbors nearby saw the man who abandoned the car and walked away. They described him as about 5'10", tall, thin, in his 20s, with dark wavy brown hair that went down to his collar. He may have been white or Hispanic. He dumped the car and walked away around 4:30 p.m. that day. The keys were found abandoned in a ditch 2 blocks away from her car. Her family held out hope that Lisa would be found alive, but sadly that wouldn't happen. On April 17th, transportation workers found her floating face down in Pryor Creek wearing only her blouse. She still had her diamond ring on her finger when she was found. There was no obvious sign of trauma to her body, and they believed that drowning was her cause of death. Due to decompensation, there was no way to know for sure what her cause of death was. Law enforcement theorized that she was thrown from the bridge above, where she was found eventually, and had likely been there since the day she went missing. There was no indication she had ever been back to her apartment that night. A suspect would begin to emerge. 2 witnesses saw a dark El Camino on the bridge where Lisa was found, and both gave descriptions of a suspicious man seen there during Lisa's disappearance. Coincidentally, or not so coincidentally, Lisa's neighbor also drove a dark El Camino exactly like the one seen. When officers went to Lisa's apartment to search for evidence, they happened upon the neighbor, as well as his El Camino. The police questioned him and he started throwing out suggestions. He suggested that she was killed by Christopher Wilder, and that he saw the man that very night in his backyard, hiding behind a tree wearing a mask, and that he suspiciously looked just like the notorious serial killer. The police created a photo lineup, asking the witnesses on the bridge to pick out the man they saw, and they both picked out the neighbor from the lineup. They showed the same photo array to the person who spotted the man who dumped the car, and she also picked the neighbor out of the lineup. From there, they obtained a search warrant for the neighbor's hair, and they compared it to hairs found in Lisa's car, as well as on her bedding. Reports suggested it matched, and they were on the right track. So understandably, the family thought the killer would be brought to justice, but was instead told by the county district attorney that it was not enough. They decided to offer an in-person lineup for the witnesses to pick him out, and this would be the last chance. But one witness was unable, and just like that, the world crashed down around them again. They promised the family that DNA evidence was in its infancy and would seal the deal eventually. Then nothing. The police would eventually refuse to answer what happened to the DNA. If it was compromised, if it was still in existence. They could not even get an answer as to whether or not it was tested. One officer said they can't tell them what happened. Then they seemed to backtrack. Another officer eventually said it was an unknown profile in 2014. They eventually said it was entered into CODIS, but not matched. There's no indication why it hasn't been processed into GEDmatch, or if it was really entered anywhere else at all, given how strange the answers were. Then comes word that somewhere along the line they excluded the neighbor as a suspect, which no one ever told the family. They appeared to suggest DNA was compared. Again, they wouldn't specifically say, however. The suspicious wording was, of course, upsetting to the family. When pressed again on the neighbor, another detective said that no one is ever totally ruled out. However, one actually has been ruled out: Christopher Wilder. He's definitely not the killer, and he was never in the area. Law officers claim they can't discuss the DNA. Definitely does sound suspicious, and there may be a valid reason why the police are being cagey regarding the DNA, but it's odd if they have the profile done and are not casting a wider net, using a service like GEDmatch, which they can use even if they don't pay a forensic genealogist. Sadly, both of Lisa's parents died without finding out what happened to Lisa. Her brother reportedly said that's unforgivable. He said that the murder is not stuck in 1984, it continues to present day, and his kids deserved a chance to know their aunt. Anyone with information can call the number on the screen. Lisa was murdered 37 years ago. Had Lisa lived, she would be 59 today. Eliza Sherman. Eliza Sherman was a good woman, a fertility nurse in Cleveland, Ohio, and a mother of 4. She was murdered on March 24, 2013, as she walked to her divorce attorney's office amid a contentious divorce. She never made it there. Instead, she was stabbed 11 times. Those inside called 911, desperately running outside to try to save her, but it was too late. This is a copy of the surveillance video here of the man or woman who killed her running away. It's hard to distinguish if it was one or the other. Suspicion quickly fell on Dr. Sanford Sherman, Aliza's estranged husband. Their divorce was heavily contested, and it had been going on for 2 years. Proceeds related to their contested divorce were due to begin in 2 days after her death. Aliza had filed for divorce in 2011. In fact, court filings show that Aliza was in fear for her life from her husband as the divorce moved forward. Eliza Sherman's divorce attorney, Gregory Moore, was very sketchy. He arranged to meet with her that day, but it turns out he wasn't even in the office, nor did he intend to be. He had taken over a case for the colleague who had lost her law license, but then he kept asking for delays. So desperate to delay, in fact, that he even called in multiple bomb threats to the courthouse to result in those delays. On the day in question, he pretended that he was inside in his office, and he provided false information to law enforcement regarding his whereabouts. Moore sent texts to Sherman claiming he was in his office, sending her there. However, prosecutors discovered via phone and key card records that Moore was nowhere near his office that day. That begs the question, what was the end plan? Why send her somewhere that he isn't, unless he knew she was never going to make it into the office? He would continue to lie to the police, and he would eventually plead guilty in 2017 to a charge of falsification for lying about his whereabouts, as well as 2 counts of felony inducing panic for calling in bomb threats to courthouses. But why did he do it? There's no clear explanation at all. A civil lawsuit was filed by his daughter against Dr. Sanford Sherman, where he admitted to extramarital affairs, including exotic dancers, and having a conversation with others on how to advise on what might be successfully done to commit a perfect crime. It also addressed something that came up in the divorce suit. It showed that her husband forged signatures of his estranged wife in order to transfer money from a Merrill Lynch account. The civil suit was not just brought by his daughter, who was the executor of her mother's estate, but also on behalf of 5 John Does who are not identified. It alleges breach of fiduciary trust, unjust enrichment, and civil remedy for criminal acts and civil conspiracy. The suit states that Aliza Sherman filed for divorce from Sanford Sherman in June of 2011. In early 2013, during the discovery process of the divorce, a forensic accountant discovered there was an account opened at Merrill Lynch in her name only in 2000. Then, between 2000 and 2010, Sanford allegedly made more than $2 million in secret deposits into the account that she had no idea she owned. Then, in 2004, he allegedly created a forged power of attorney that provided him the authority to withdraw the funds from the account, eventually draining it completely. His attorney argued there was nothing wrong with the secret account, as they were marital assets earned by Sanford Sherman during the course of his marriage, in which he had joint and equal ownership in interest irrespective of whose name was on it, and therefore his forgery and duplicity was unimportant. Later on, claiming she agreed to let him do it, and the funds were used for family expenses anyway. Except for it was discovered that those family funds that he used were taking his mistress to New York City and another to Boca Raton, Florida, and he was also accused of making sexual advances and later threats to an exotic dancer while threatening to kill her and her father, and also impersonating a relative of theirs. The divorce, had she not been murdered, would have addressed Aliza's proof of other hidden assets. It was those assets that began to cause her to speak out that she was afraid he would either kill her or have her killed. A statement she made as early as January 2012 was an email she sent to a friend, including the sentence, "He will stop at nothing to hurt me. I don't think I will ever be safe." An ex-police friend named Larry Shanker admitted in a 2015 deposition that Sanford Sherman asked him how someone would go about committing the perfect murder. Shanker stated he provided Sanford with a scenario that he would use if he was committing such a crime, such as not using a gun because it could be traced or heard, using clothes not belonging to you, covering body and hands. A conversation Sherman didn't claim didn't happen, but that he doesn't recall. It appears Jennifer eventually dropped the lawsuit, but not before all the details were made into public record. It also appears the children have cut ties with their father. Gregory Moore was sentenced to 6 months in jail and lost his law license in 2018. The Justice for Aliza campaign has been dedicated to honoring her life and fighting for justice, holding annual vigils to keep her memory alive. Jennifer maintains an active Facebook page with updates. If you have any information about this case, please call the number on your screen. All tips can remain anonymous, but it appears there's a $100,000 reward. Aliza was murdered 8 years ago, and she has yet to see justice. Thanks everyone for watching and listening. I'm working on slowing my speech down, and I probably sound different right now because I slowed the actual speech down on this last one to try to space it out a little bit more. I'm doing my best, and I'll try to get better. Thanks everybody. Take care of yourselves and each other.